Hey Guru Nation, welcome back to the Clinical Trials Guru. So I promised you last week that I'm going to go through a site qualification visit monitoring report because I'm a contract CRA. I did it primarily for my CRA Academy so I could teach students better. Even though I'm not one of the main teachers, I do teach them when the students intern at the clinics. At least the clinics in San Bernardino and Irvine. So I have a Sqv Report. Site will never see this. This is a monitoring report, and I know a lot of you newer sites are a little concerned and anxious and nervous about your upcoming site selection visits. So I'm going to go through what a monitor writes on their report when they come to your site for a site qualification visit. And maybe some of you more experienced sites, you may know all the stuff they ask, but you may not have ever seen a monitoring report. And I wish I can show you. I can't, but I can go through some of the most important points. So the first thing they do was the protocol synopsis reviewed. This will include the study objective and design, the visit schedule and procedures, the inclusion-exclusion criteria, enrollment, randomization process, investigational product administration procedures. Then they go through the investigator brochure where they talk about all the safety information that's known about this drug or this investigational product. They're going to ask you, this is number 3 on the list, what's your process of informed consent? So I'm not going to go through that now. There's plenty of videos where I talk about that. They're going to ask you for that. If you don't know or if you look like a deer in headlights when they ask you this, you're going to be in trouble. Have this memorized. It takes 30 seconds to explain it. Process of informed consent. Okay. Process for data capture in case report form. They may ask you that. It's on this report. What they're probably going to ask you is, do you use paper-based source, and what are your medical records? Do you use electronic medical records or paper-based electronic records? Then they're going to ask you about the PI experience using the EDC, whatever EDC platform they're using, the PI and staff experience. If you don't have experience with that platform, it's okay, right? We've used every EDC, so we just say yes to all this, but they're going to ask you that. What they're going to ask you about the electronic medical records, I already went through that. Archiving study records. So there's actually, Chris sent me this today about archiving. So it's actually pretty confusing in the United States, and every country has their own regulations. But let me read you from the FDA's website. Okay, record retention. An investigator shall retain records required to be maintained under this part for a period of 2 years following the date a marketing application is approved for the drug for the indication, or if no application is to be filed, the application is not approved for such indication until 2 years after the investigation is discontinued and FDA is notified. So, I mean, that's still pretty confusing. 5 years is the safe answer to say. We retain them for 5 years, and after that, we discuss with the sponsor on whether we send it to Iron Mountain, which is a vendor, or whatever vendor you want to use, or send it back to the sponsor. Okay, so they're going to ask you that. Archiving. Don't get scared when they ask you these things. They're going to ask you about patient recruitment because that's what they care about. How are you recruiting patients? Okay, do you have a database? Most of the time, they prefer that they hear that your PI has a database of patients or that the research clinic has a database. They don't want to hear that your primary strategy is advertising through TV, radio, Facebook, whatever the case may be. They want to hear those magic words, our site database, our PI's private practice. If you don't have that, figure out how you can make that happen. Maybe you have a partner physician that refers patients to you. Talk about their private practice and their database, okay? They're going to go through the estimated start date and completion date. They're probably going to tell you about the investigator meeting. They're going to ask you if you need any assistance in advertising for recruitment. Then they get into the PI qualifications, so CV, medical license, GCP. How often do you do GCP? Okay, it's only required every 2 years to redo it, but if your SOPs say every year, we just did a webinar on this, you should be doing it every year. Same thing with your coordinators. How overworked are your coordinators? This is going to be February's webinar. How do you know when your coordinators are overworked? What's an appropriate workload for a coordinator? Right? They're going to ask you questions. They're asking you, how many studies are you doing? How many studies is your coordinator doing? How experienced are they? They're assessing whether you're the right fit for the study. The good news is in 2018, supply and demand, most of the leverage is in the site's favor. So they can't be that picky because there's a lot of studies out there. Then they're going to look at the facility, okay? Secure storage for source docs and CRFs if they're paper. Storage for investigational product. Equipment, is it calibrated? Are you able to use a central lab? Do you require any additional equipment for this study? Every protocol requires its own equipment. Do you have emergency equipment, a crash cart on site? How far is the nearest hospital? Is monitoring space adequate? They're going to actually physically tour your site to check for all these things, and they're going to ask you these questions. Then they're going to talk about or ask you about the pharmacy and investigational product. Is there a stored area, double locked? Do you have a refrigerator and freezer? Do you have a freezer to store PK samples? Is it calibrated? Does the site have a backup generator? Okay, these are things they're going to ask you. They might even ask you if you have a SOP in place for dispensing investigational product. Even though most studies you're not required to do that, they can ask you these things. Don't get thrown off by these questions. Okay. Then they get into the IRB. So hopefully you're able to use a central IRB, and that's the end of that section. Regulatory. They're going to ask you if you've ever been inspected by a regulatory agency. Do you have written SOPs? Do you have a regulatory person, or is it just the coordinator doing it? Then they get into monitoring. Okay, are you okay with the monitor coming out every 6 weeks? How much time notice does the monitor need to give to schedule visits? Then they're going to ask who does your budget and contract. And most importantly, they're going to ask you your study forecasts. Total number of patients planned for the study, for your site, how many you think you can screen per month, how many you think you can randomize per month, how quickly you think you can get your first patient screened after your SIV, how quickly can you execute your contract and budget, and how quickly can you get your startup regulatory documents done. That's it. Thank you very much. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.